Welcome to Season 4 of Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm Josh Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement and a former Commissioner of Health in Baltimore City. Our goal is to bring scientific evidence and experience to current topics in public health through engaging interviews with scientists, community leaders, policy experts, public health officials, clinicians, and more. If you have ideas or questions for us to cover, please email us at publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith Rogers, producer of Public Health on Call. In a special bonus episode, Stephanie Desmond talks to frequent guest Dr. Gigi Granval of the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security about some great news. The FDA has granted emergency use authorization for COVID-19 vaccines for children ages 5 and up. They discuss how critical it is to get this population vaccinated as soon as possible. Let's listen. Gigi Granval, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
The FDA has granted emergency use authorization for COVID vaccines for children ages 5 to 11. This means these kids can get their shots as early as this week. So it's finally happening. There must be a lot of happy parents out there.
Absolutely. I've been waiting for this day for a very long time.
I guess the question right now is, how should parents approach this? I mean, I have friends who are planning to be, the first people in line. Are there going to be people out there who maybe won't be?
Sure. So vaccination rates among teens right now, 12 and up, is much lower than for adults. So we see that hesitation already in younger, that parents or guardians may have for their kids in that age group. And so I expect that there will be even more of that for younger kids.
Mm-hmm. Why is it so important for kids to be vaccinated?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why it's a good idea for children to be vaccinated. But I think people have been so used to thinking of COVID as a disease of adults, a disease of older adults, that they have kind of, set aside the risks to children, and they're not insignificant. And I think that, people, if it was just a disease of children, I think that their perception of what needs to happen and what they would do and the vaccination rates would be totally different, because children are suffering from COVID. They're suffering directly. There are hospitalizations. Everybody's heard the stories of child hospitals being full and at capacity. And we have children who are not hospitalized, but have long COVID and symptoms that last for 4 or 8 weeks after infection or longer. And these kinds of effects are worrying. There's loss of smell and taste, which can have mental health implications. I talked to a mother of a teen who hasn't been able to taste anything for a year. And so she's, distraught. And so there's, lots of things that are going on besides hospitalization and mortality. And then, there's also the potential brain fog and like people who were good students that are having trouble concentrating or reading. And a lot of the therapies are very similar to concussion protocols. And that, to me, is just scary as a parent, because you want your child to grow up to be at their best potential and having a functional brain and pushing your brain to be as big and as smart as it could be is a big part of that. And so I will definitely be first in line as soon as it's possible to get my 11-year-old vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have an interesting situation because your 11-year-old will be 12 this month. And I'm wondering, have you thought about whether you should wait for the adult dose?
Yeah, so a lot of people have this misconception that the dose is based on weight or something like that. And for a lot of medications, that's the case. If you're a certain weight, then you should have a certain dose, and because you don't want the concentration to be too high or too low in your blood. But that's not the way that vaccines work. They stimulate your immune system based, and your reaction is based on how good and how strong your immune system is. And so it's a balance between making sure that you stimulate your immune system, but not so much that you get side effects. And so, we all know that these vaccines have some side effects: redness at the injection site, tiredness, sometimes slight fever and chills, but that last for a couple of days. And so this lower dose for the child's dose appears to have the equivalent amount of stimulation of the immune system, but with a slightly lower side effect profile.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that since the stimulation of the immune system seems quite equivalent between teens and the 5 to 11-year-olds, I think it's not really worth waiting, and I will go ahead as soon as I can.
Mm-hmm. And as you said, the side effects may be less for kids, so that's a positive for parents to hear.
Yeah, nobody wants to see. You also don't want to have a bad experience with a vaccine that will make it harder to get the other vaccines that you need to get. I mean, children have a whole bunch of vaccines that they need to get over the course of their childhood, with a whole bunch of them that happen at age 11 as well. So there's you want to minimize your pain as a parent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I know that you're concerned that not as many 12 to 18-year-olds have been vaccinated because as their parents, but are you worried that the same will happen with the younger group?
I do. I think there'll be regional effects. I think people have more concern about children suffering from COVID in different parts of the country and in different parts of the state. So I think there will be some pretty big variations on how eager parents are. Here in Baltimore City, I talk to parents all the time who just cannot wait. They wanted to get their children enrolled in clinical trials. And so there's that group. And then, I talk to people from other places and they are not as enthusiastic. So, and then another thing to keep in mind is that I've noticed a huge uptick in the misinformation coming my way and the negative comments, let's putting it mildly, on Twitter and so forth when I'm promoting pro-vaccine messaging. And so I think parents are going to be subjected to a slew of misinformation that we have not experienced thus far in this pandemic, which is saying something. I mean, I think that there's a significant increase in misinformation.
Both of my teenagers have been vaccinated, and a lot of it in my mind was that they're all going to school together. School is as back to as normal as possible. They're wearing masks, but I mean, I would think that it's a no-brainer if you're going to send your kids to school all day to give them an extra layer of protection.
Right. And in some places there are requirements. So for Baltimore City schools, in the high school, you can't play sports in the winter if you're not vaccinated. And I expect other places to follow suit because it's a good idea if you can't always wear a mask and you can't always have distancing. Vaccination is a really important tool that we have.
Mm-hmm. So what about kids under 5? I mean, I know that my baby nephew will not be joining us for Thanksgiving this year because he can't get a vaccination.
Yeah, I don't know when the timetable is. I've heard people say spring or early 2022, but I don't think we're close to the rumblings from people the manufacturers or FDA to know when that's going to happen. Certainly, transmission is high, and so that usually means that if it's a clinical trial, people will be meeting their clinical endpoints, and so that is the small silver lining in a terrible situation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that one thing obviously this all happened at such a rapid speed, but at the same time, now it feels like there's been a really long lag for these, 5 to 11-year-olds. How do we explain that to people? And I'm curious how you do.
So I really wanted vaccination to be more available sooner before the start of the school year. And the American Academy of Pediatrics also was writing letters to the FDA saying, we've had this 400, 500% increase in COVID transmission in this age group. We have school systems where they're actively taking away the protections that we have for children. And so we should have vaccine. And I don't know what I would do if I was a parent of if I lived in a place where they were taking away or prohibiting masks and things like that. But now that I'm experiencing some of the misinformation and some of the coordinated action against vaccines, I can kind of see why the FDA and everyone were more hesitant and wanted to get more data to support that. It's a tough balance, but still, I wish that they had gotten the vaccine out sooner.
Well, overall, this is really great news, and I'm really happy that a whole new group of people will be protected soon. Gigi Gronvall, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Public Health on Call is produced by Josh Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by Spencer Greer, Niall Owen McCusker, and Matthew Martin with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo. Social media support from Grace Holes Fernandez and Caroline Wong. Thank you for listening.